And I'm sorry, I have a real, I often think of that joke about the unexamined life is not worth living.
Right, and so Jungian psychology is about reflection,
He knows the next line.
right? So Jungian psychology is about reflection and learning about something new. Okay, it really goes around only a few points, but it keeps getting addressed in different ways. And so if you reflect on those different ways, it somehow expands your own way of looking at the world, your observation of the world, or your client's observation of the world, and that changes things. Okay, and so there's this book that I've been looking at lately called "The Wisdom of the Psyche" by Anne Belford Ulanoff, and I never imagined there was ever anybody with the specialty of Dr. Ulanoff, but her specialty was she was professor of psychiatry and religion at Union Theological Seminary. Okay, and she says some amazing things, right? But one of the things is that there's a gap. There's a gap in the psyche between your conscious and your unconscious. And God comes from the unconscious side to meet you. Okay, and so if you reflect on these things, something comes to assist. And so in the depths of despair, like you were describing, Kelly, where someone is really in terrible despair, but if they experience it very thoroughly, and then somehow something will emerge from their own psyche to save them, to be pardon? Right. And and so, Dr. Ulinoff would say that's God.
Some part needs mental health. I go back and forth because when you think about DMT and different things that are neuroscience and things like that, that's going to affect how a person's
But I think it's the important thing is to have a person listening, Brandon, to have another, which is the service you
Yes.
provide.
And I think it's the ability to think outside the box always, because
Yeah.
profound, I'm thinking with this particular lady, she was just saying how profoundly alone and dark everything seemed to be. And I was saying, well, what's the darkness like? Can you describe the darkness? Physically, what's the darkness like? And so if the darkness is a solidity, then it's something to build upon, it's something to stand upon, it's something to rely upon, something that is always there as a context. Or if the darkness has no form, then it's a place where you can go. It's a liberating place where you can go into, go where you want with the darkness.
Right.
And it's just thinking outside the purely the vacuous nature of one's despair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be curious as to how
Could you give me that book?
they felt about the darkness. I mean, were they afraid of the darkness? Did they, or were they entranced by the darkness? And yeah, I'm just curious as to how that would go. Because whether it's your friend or not, I mean, I know people who hear voices, and they consider those voices okay, so. And then some people are terrified by it. There's something out of their control that's coming in and
Right,
interfering.
and that's where religion stepped in, right? That's where religion stepped in and said, okay, I'll intermediate between you and God, okay, or between you and the devil, and so you'll be okay. And so religion stepped in to fill that.
Well, what's interesting is what Bill said about the rise of the collective connection of the individual to the collective. You take the miracle at Lourdes, for instance, where she sees a vision, the young girl sees the vision in the trash dump, the medical waste dump of the Virgin Mary. The vision is in concert with the collective religious vision. And I always found that fascinating. It's very specific. And I think that's really what's interesting about this. Is that it's not self-manufactured, it's shared. It's kind of a shared vision.
Oh, you mean it's not consciously manufactured? It emanates or emerges
From this rhizome that you're talking about.
from
Yeah.
a bigger source, a more fundamental.
I mean, it could have been an alien, but they didn't really concentrate on aliens in France in 18.
Theory in a trash heap.
Yeah.
You're very. I love how. Rather than I love how. I hate how cynical I am and how skeptical I am. I was going to say I love how innocent you are, but that's an awful thing to say.
Please.
Well, I have to admit that Jung has sort of liberated that naivety in me a little bit, and I feel that, and I can't explain how it's happened, but it's an innocence made real. It's like a childlike thing. And
If I were to
there's a
relate to
joy
that,
in it.
Yeah, I would say I could agree in a sense that it makes me feel like I'm okay. It's like, wow, even smart people do this stuff.
Yeah, I can play now, and I think Skip's a big part of that too.
Well, have you heard of the Red Book? Jung's Red Book? No. Carl Jung.
There's a generation.
Carl Jung's Red Book, Liber Novus. Have you heard of that?
Yes, brother.
Okay. Well, Dr. Jung had his own visioning experience, okay, which lasted 5 years, okay, and it was a psychogenic experience caused by his breakup with Dr. Freud, and the fact that he was living in Switzerland in the midst of World War I. And so this visioning period went on for 5 years. And he documented this period for 16 years. And he wrote the story of it in German calligraphy. And so the Red Book itself is quite an amazing book. It's just an unbelievable book. And if you go on my YouTube channel and just go in on any of the live streams, you'll see a link to the day they opened the Red Book, because he did not approve of it being published in his lifetime. And so even Jungian analysts did not know of it, most of them. I mean, with the exception of a very close community, a community no bigger than the people at this table, until long after his death. And when that was published in 2009, 48 years after his death, I said, oh my God, this is an experience like I had. And I had an experience in 1993 that wasn't the Mephistopheles experience, another experience that lasted 8 months, and it evolved as a novel. But it was a novel that was not written by my conscious mind. It came directly from my unconscious. And it involved persona, actual visions of people and so on. And it went on for 8 months. And for 8 months I was being awakened every morning by this character and, shaken awake and forcing me to go to the computer and type out another chapter of this book. And I would just go to the computer and put my hands on the typewriter, on the keys, and it wrote itself. Literally, it wrote itself. Okay, and so I have the sense that great novelists, this is what happens to them, and then when they can't get back to that place, they see that as writer's block, right? And but when Jung's Red Book was published, I said, "Oh my God, this is what happened to Dr. Jung." Then I understood it in that kind of a context, and that informed all of his later work. But Jungian analysts in the first or the second half of the 20th century had no clue about it. They didn't know about it. They did.
Why was it a secret?
Well, because it was his personal visioning, okay? And he was a psychiatrist, so he knew he was visioning, and he knew he was intentionally going into these visions with his unconscious, and he was recording them, okay? But he thought that the average person would think that they were madness, okay? And he actually said that they would have developed into a madness, into a psychosis, but for the fact that he was a psychiatrist when this happened to him.
What if you were, if you were keeping your own personal diary and suddenly people read it, and you wouldn't want to have to defend it, because it's still alive to you. You're still working with it. And I think that's where he was. He was just, it was still an animal.
I don't have to answer to anything I put in there.
Yeah, it's a living
Right.
animal, and he's
If we get in
sorting
an
things
argument,
out.
I will go to my journals and
Yeah.
come up with the date where such and such happened.
Yeah.
It's irrefutable then.
Yeah, but I mean, I do the same. I do all these paintings I never intend for anybody else to see, and I leave them on the walls, and that's a living thing I've got going on with these paintings,
Absolutely.
And I don't, I sometimes I'll exhibit a few of them, but I don't really ask anybody's opinion. That's the last thing I want.
So let's talk about
They don't know.
where
They don't
Jung
know
was
what's going
coming
on.
from. Okay, he was very impressed by Nietzsche. Okay, and Nietzsche, and thus spake Zarathustra, said God is dead.
First page.
Yeah. Thus spake Zarathustra, and at the end of the 19th century, he was because.
Well, that God was dead.
That God was dead, okay? And the reason was that the scientific method had punched holes in all the mythology, okay? And so it wasn't alive in anyone's psyche anymore. And so Dr. Jung found where God lives, how he goes about doing the business of the Godhead, okay? It goes on in here, right? Or we project it. I don't know where it goes on, but Dr. Jung demonstrated the living God, okay, and that's what hasn't been understood, okay. So I just want to read you three quick quotes from Religious Experience and God, okay. So, with our human knowledge, we always move in the human sphere, but in the things of God, we should keep quiet and not make any arrogant assertions about what is greater than ourselves. Belief as a religious phenomenon cannot be discussed. It seems to me, however, that when belief enters into practical life, we are entitled to the opinion that it should be coupled with the Christian virtue of modesty, which does not brag about absoluteness, but brings itself to admit the unfathomable ways of God, which have nothing to do with the Christian revelation. Okay, so that was one. And then he says, Christianity, like every closed system of religion, has an undoubted tendency to suppress the unconscious in the individual as much as possible, thus paralyzing his fantasy activity. Instead, religion offers stereotyped symbolic concepts that are meant to take the place of his unconscious once and for all. The symbolic concepts of all religions are recreations of unconscious processes in a typical, universally binding form. Religious teaching supplies, as it were, the final information about the last things and the world beyond human consciousness. Wherever we can observe a religion being born, we see how the doctrinal figures flow into the founder himself as revelations. In other words, as concretizations of his unconscious fantasy. The forms welling up from his unconscious are declared to be universally valid and thus replace the individual fantasies of others. Okay, and then one more. If you try to be literal about the doctrine, you are putting yourself aside until there is nobody left that would represent it, but corpses. If, on the other hand, you truly assimilate the doctrine, you will alter it creatively by your individual understanding and thus give life to it. The life of most ideas consists in their controversial nature, i.e., that you can disagree with them even if you recognize their importance for a majority. If you fully agree with just as well by a gramophone record. So, I mean, he's a pretty outspoken guy, but I don't know, in terms of someone who's in pain, and again, I'm not a mental health professional, but I think that just being the witness, being the witness and understanding what that person is going through is very useful. I mean, I know, let's say I know some young men who have had certain sexual peccadillos in their lifetime, okay? And by simply talking to them about the fact that this may be just a normal part of growing up, it makes them accept themselves much better, okay? And Dr. Jung was about instinct. He didn't want us to cut ourselves off from our own instincts. Okay, he says we have within ourselves a 2 million year old man, or it's actually 13 and a half, and woman.
3 million year old woman.
13 and a half billion year old woman, going back to the first microbes, right? And so that natural capacity of instinct is going to serve you much better than a formulaic answer. Okay, and so in terms of helping someone, and Kelly would have more experience, way more experience than me or anyone, but don't you feel, Kelly, that just by being a witness to your clients' troubles, it really helps them? And
I just say it. I'm crazy too. You know what I mean? Like
we all are.
we've all heard some
Don't
way.
think
So
you're special
I
if you
definitely think that making that helps me to feel really just to feel comfortable and just to how you really help anybody if they don't feel comfortable enough to talk around you. So just
You're like Jung said, I'm in the soup too, or you're in the soup too.
That's right.
Yeah. You're in the soup too, eh?
whenever you got a new client, Dr. Jung would say, "Oh, so you're in the soup too."
That's my new favorite Jung quote.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with Eckhart Tolle.
Yes, I love it.
Well, I really love his writings because they really get me to think, and he really just says it's just really trying to witness your thoughts, and not view things as good or bad. They just are, and he says from there you really see the possibilities.
You're talking about Jung, right?
Tolle. Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah, I think he's a catalyst for many people.
Yes.
Yeah, at all different levels.
This book's really
And, you know, working with imageries, you know, you can cut through all sorts of depths of understanding, and people still get something out of it, I think.
So I have a question. Was he fearful of all these visions he was having after his breakup with,
I think at one point he thought he might be having a breakdown, okay, and having either a schizophrenic situation or a psychotic situation, because he was a psychiatrist at that time,
right.
and he had 15 years of working in an insane asylum. Okay, so he knew about what he spoke, right? And so he said that it was his most difficult experiment, which was to experiment on himself and actually experience these things. And that was the point, the experience, which is by actually experiencing them, then he could.
And that's why he developed active imagination, so he could surge ahead, move forward with the research.
and writing out his thoughts, writing out his
Right.
visions?
So he kept
Notebooks.
Instead of
He
keeping
black
it in,
books.
keeping
Right.
it, telling a story to himself,
Right.
essentially.
So he
Right.
kept a professional journal, and as a matter of fact, for the new people here, I have a very good article, and I think I have a few copies of it, so I'll share it with you. So this is for Nancy and Brendan at least, and anybody else want one? This is the first essay in this book, Jung's Red Book for Our
Volume one.
Time.
Volume one.
Volume 1.
Yeah,
right.
I got it. I've read it.
Right.
yeah.
And this is really you want that or no? It's really a profound essay in that book. But you start to get a sense of why this stuff is important. Okay. And Thomas Arst, who's the co-editor of this book, wrote to me today and said that volume 3 will be out in February, and they've now been approved for volume 4. And what this is it started as a project of 50 Jungian analysts writing from their perspective what the Red Book meant. And it's just become a diamond. I mean, it's because it's called Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And it's become a diamond because every one of them comes at a different facet. Okay, they see it in a different way. And by reading each of these essays, you get a new way of looking at it. And what starts to emerge is this incredible diamond that's being perfected, and many facets are being revealed, and you see the value of it.
You know, I was looking through, because my kids are going to go to college, and I was looking through the catalogs and stuff, and I came across art therapy. Art therapy. Anyway, the one thing they do, the cornerstone, the hinge on which the whole program real swings, or is activated, is through the Red Book. They read the Red Book, and that's
Wow.
the start of going into art therapy.
Oh, yeah, the art therapy at Run Lodge there.
Yeah.
They have a great program.
Yeah, well, I know who that person is.
This red book is different than the library notebook.
They're okay.
That's a book about Liber Novus.
Because I have that one.
Oh, right.
You have
the
Liber
red.
Novus.
Yes,
Okay, so
yeah.
this is the 50 essays about it. They're now in 3 volumes.
Okay.
They're now in 2 volumes published, and the third coming out in
Okay.
Like
February.
knowing like this kind of stuff, being able to kind of
And the big
try to not
red
think so
book is
rational.
the one with the
Is-
drawings and
is
the.
also
It's
Liber
very
Novus.
quiet.
Okay.
And
That's
even
Liber
if
Novus.
mentally disabled, like a lot of people just kind of blow them off. Like, and I like I think
Dive
that,
in.
yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think that like there's something there that
There's a
like
mother
us,
lode.
our conscious mind, like is like, oh, I just want this, that. But I think there's a lot there, and I really like working with people that have schizophrenia and things like that, and developmentally disabled because they have that something that we don't, that we've gotten
Is
for
that
whatever
like
Yeah.
reason away from.
people too?
So,
Is that like
so
autistic people
one
too?
thing to think about,
Yes,
Brendan,
definitely.
in
Very
terms of your clients, is this idea of individuation, which was the central idea that Dr. Jung worked with throughout his career and throughout the collected works. And that idea has to do with you're becoming yourself. Okay, and you know, the U.S. Army's motto, "Be all you can be." Well, your body, everything about your physical self is trying to do that. Okay, and you know, we saw this thing about the development of the brain in fetuses the other night, and it's amazing. You're producing like 7 million cells a second at a certain point in your physical development in the womb, right? And so your body knows how to become itself, right? And so that applies not only to things like producing your heart and telling your heart to beat for 100 years, it also has to do with your psyche. And so Dr. Jung's point was that this is about the development of your psyche. And so his point is you either make the unconscious conscious and then individuate consciously, or and if you do that, you can go at it walking upright. Otherwise, you're going to get whipped up, and you're going to end up anyway of individuating, but it's going to be very painful, and it may not end up the way you best could be.
And I think this is one of the things I was hoping for this group, although maybe there's a group therapy, maybe it's group psychotherapy that I'm also looking for, is I love the idea of individuation. I love the idea of personalism. But I think the thing that we all want to know is it's okay. It's okay to be you.
That's right.
That's what we need to know.
That's right.
And sometimes it's scary to be yourself.
Well, and
That's
some,
what they said to young Adolf, you know?
yeah.
It's a little scary to let you be yourself.
Well, you had to go there.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Jung's criticism of the church was against the idea of privatio boni. Okay, are you familiar with that term? Okay, well, in the Catholic Church, the idea of privatio boni said that God is all good and that evil is only the deprivation of good. And so it's like Stalin and Hitler didn't get enough mother's milk, you know, and therefore they were evil.
Even when they were children.
Yeah.
They were pretty fully individuated though, weren't they?
Yeah, oh, definitely. And so, you know, Dr. Jung makes this remark, and I think it's in Psychology of the Unconscious, where he says there's this joke about the Texas boy that goes to the father confessor, and he says, this terrible thing has happened, Father. And the father says, oh, you seem very upset. What is it? And he said, well, I committed murder. And the father confessor says, how many? You know, some people are going to be evil. And, you know, are you familiar with Viktor Frankl? Have you ever heard of him? Okay, Viktor Frankl was a psychoanalyst in Vienna before World War II. And he wrote a book after the war called
Search for meaning.
Search for Meaning. Right? Okay, so Frankl during the war was in 4 prison camps, including Auschwitz, for 3 years. And he saw the worst things that could possibly, human depravity. And what he said was that there are only two races of people. There are decent people and there are indecent people. And he said even among the SS guards, there were occasional decent people. Um, and he said that with politicians, you always want to look for the politician that's not thinking the ends justify the means, because there are certain means that would destroy the unholiest or would sully the most holy ends, right? And so we all have to reflect, and so Dr. Edward Edinger, who was a leading analyst of the late 20th century, he died in 1998, so he never even saw the Red Book, but he was asked in one of his lectures, how do you individuate? What's the way to do it? And he said, think of whatever you love or hate and reflect on that.
That's correct.
Right?
That's absolutely the best advice.
And so the point finally was, and Ulanoff talks about it, because she talks about Jung falling for the quote-unquote devil's trick. Okay, so the devil's trick, as she describes it, is that let's suppose in your family, your son or someone comes out as a homosexual. And so if you fall for the devil's trick, what you do is you argue about homosexuality instead of trying to work with, okay, how do we continue to love our son or whatever it is, okay? Because that's first things first, as she says, that's first things first. And
First
so
things first is, why does it make a difference?
yeah, that's right. Why does it make a difference? Not arguing about
Why am I feeling
on the-
differently suddenly?
Yeah, in these sterile debates, right? And you can apply that to almost any political debate we have currently. And so she said that Jung fell for the devil's trick because he stayed on the psychology side. He tried to sell himself through the 20th century as a scientist, okay, and he did so, I mean, pretty effectively. He said, okay, these are the things that I'm finding in my clinic, right? And he analyzed 80,000 dreams and so on. So he says, this is all empirical. I can prove that this shows up in many individuals, right? And so that, but he stayed on the psychological side and he never challenged theology. Why? Because his father had been a pastor, and so had 7 of his uncles. And he knew that if he started talking about the things that he was becoming aware of with theologians, that they would hate it, and mostly they did. I mean, he was attacked unmercifully during his lifetime by theologians. And Ulanoff's point, remember now the professor of psychiatry and religion at Union, her point is that Jung had to get out of that sterile debate in the psychology side and get into the theology side and start looking at God himself, because in the end, God provides the good results. Okay? In other words, all civilization, the fact that we're sitting here this evening, comes from the good side, not the evil side, because the evil side is destructive. And so if we had gone with the evil side, then we would have a country of slaves, and we'd still have slaves and so on, and things wouldn't have changed for the better for Americans. So, go ahead.
That's an American analysis, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Because the fact is, the only reason that we are here, I contend, is because we do all have that dark side. But we have it in Nicaragua and El Salvador. We maintain slavery and
Put it over there.
over there, so that we can meet.
Not in my backyard.
Huh?
Not in my backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but-
Well, we've pretty much gotten the dark side into the U.S. now, but in some ways. But yes, you're right. I mean, that's essentially the issue. And so what Ulanoff's point is that if you went over to the metaphysical and applied both the psychological and the theological together, then the human psyche normally decides for the good. Okay? Because the evil is, now she says evil is nothing, but then evil is also something, obviously.
What were her views on capitalism? Do you know?
Okay, on Ulanoff's or?
Ulanoff, yeah.
She
Ulanoff's.
talks about that.
I don't think she talks much about capitalism.
About liberal market forces and stuff like that, because it seems to be a great. I mean, it's the system we're living in, but it
Right.
seems to be.
Capitalism certainly has a big shadow. It's got a big dark side.
Big dark side,
Yeah.
and
I'm sorry, Grandma, that this has gotten so bad tonight. But
it begs the question about: are we gravitating towards the good side or the dark side? I mean, where are we going with this?
I think her position is that civilization represents the good side.
I think we're doomed as a species, myself. I don't think we got a chance.
He's such an optimist.
Well, this was Dr.
I just don't
Jung's
think we're that
fundamental
smart
fear,
enough.
which is that finally the human species has gotten into has gotten to the point where we can destroy ourselves.
Yeah.
And so we do need people who have gone to the next level of consciousness.
This was a study, I think it was just done in England. And it was in the paper today, Washington
So,
Post.
Renata, I'm hoping that you can
And
still hear
it's
this,
called
even though
I think
the
it's
video
called a
has
syndrome, but it's
stopped.
Dunning-Kruger.
Confirm that for me.
What syndrome?
And let it
What
continue
I think
to
it's a Dunning-Kruger syndrome, they call it. Those are the two authors, I believe. But so the idea is that you have, they gave people tests, and then they'd ask them how they scored on them. And it seemed like the lower the score they made, the higher they thought they did on the test. So the idea is that you've all been to meetings where there's somebody that knows absolutely nothing, and yet they espouse,
Right.
their opinions as if they are the world's total expert, and they believe themselves to be that way. And in fact, they're often just like blown away when they take a test and they don't get 100 on it, and they thought they should have, and they got a 50 or something. And then it wandered off into something about Trump. But anyway,
As these articles are wont to do.
But I love that about Eckhart Tolle, because he's talking about what you're talking about. About there's an increasing number of us who are trying to access that higher consciousness. And he's always optimistic, Eckhart Tolle, isn't he, about the increasing number of people who are becoming conscious.
that's why there's
Right.
positive people like him. Yeah.
And he thinks that there's something evolutionary in that we're bound, all of us eventually are bound to achieve a greater consciousness of the oneness, of the unity.
If we don't destroy ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a fallacy, because I think just if you look historically at the advance and retreat of civilizations, you have that as a cycle, not a cycle per se, but an effervescence every now and then, and there's always a retreat. There's always a retreat.
Yeah, but like this guy I was listening to the other day, he was talking about rebirth, being born again, it's sort of like doing this. And he says, but every time you're reborn, the mountain's a little higher. So maybe we are progressing.
I don't think we've gotten away from the evolutionary theories of the 1880s, 1890s, though. I think it's just a fallacy.
Oh, I agree.
I mean,
think it is too.
there's a material evolution kind of obviously, but
Yeah, I think we gotta
but it's more of
somehow.
it's more about technique and refining technique and method than it is about evolution.
Well, I think we just gotta slip out from underneath the whole, illusion we live under, live within. Somehow we're gonna slip out from under that. Some people are gonna be left in that, and these people are gonna be over here going,
Hey, why don't you
just don't
pull
tell
off?
them about it and we'll move on. And they'll die off.
Yeah.
And that's the only way I can see it happening where it goes positive. Because, I mean, even what we talk about, even the language we use, everything keeps us in, keeps us inside that little sphere of ignorance that we all carry around with us. And we use it in such a familiar way, most people will never know.
Professor used to say the dinosaurs bopped around for 150 million years, and we're not going to last the first million.
Yeah, well, that's
Something like-
individuation.
But we'll leave better,
So the-
artifacts.
So the
We'll eat
individuation,
Yes.
the individuation process
You know that
is a
Garland
process
thing, don't you?
of contest, defeat, lamentation, and rebirth. It's a cycle that we go through multiple times in our life. And the more times we go through that, the more evolved we become. Okay, and so we have people in society who haven't been through that enough times, okay, and we see that in our political life today. And so they imagine that they walk on water. And there's a terrific movie about this called Florence Foster Jenkins, okay? And I'll leave the metaphors for everybody else to work out, but Florence Foster Jenkins was a woman who was born into $1 billion, basically. So she had unlimited funds, and she loved opera, among other things. And her husband helped her along with that. So she started to hold these events at the Waldorf Astoria in New York, where she had all the rich and famous come
Dunning-Kruger, right?
yeah, come in and they would give money to the opera, and they would put on a talent show, and these rich people would do their talents, except she couldn't sing, right? Not at all. But finally it got to the point where her husband rented Carnegie Hall for a night and had her give an operatic performance at Carnegie Hall, and he couldn't sell the tickets. It was right at the end of World War II, so there were all these Marines and sailors coming back from the war. So he went out on the streets and gave out like 3,000 tickets to guys that were on the street, right? And so she did this performance. It was recorded, and from an operatic point of view, it was atrocious because nobody had ever told her that she couldn't sing, right? And so she thought she was a wonderful opera singer. And but to this day, the most popular recording in the gift shop at Carnegie Hall is her performance. No kidding. No
It was
kidding.
real popular with the soldiers too.
And the soldiers and sailors loved it because they thought it was a comedy routine.
A parody.
This was a coloratura range of singing. So
Right,
it was
but
very high and
you know, if nobody tells you that you don't walk on water, then you keep thinking it.
Yeah.
You
And
don't realize you're drowning.
yeah, you don't realize
She
you're drowning.
manifested it because she did end up being that big time selling all that. You
Hold
know
on.
what I mean? She really should. Right?
Yeah, and so, you know, lo and behold, we have a man who got himself into the presidency doing that, and God knows what the consequences will be for the rest of us. But nonetheless,
If
nobody.
you see that article, read it. Yeah, it's in the Post
But
today.
you asked about
Dunning-Kruger. Yeah.
about the capitalism. Okay, so I went to a business school that was all statistics, and it was at a time when they were saying everything has to be bottom line and it's quarterly, and here are all the statistics, and this proves it, and we're going to have great things happening. This was in the late 70s that I went to school there. Okay, and I joked that business school was 15 courses in statistics by different names. But the problem is that the world doesn't work that way. Okay, and so when I graduated and went to Japan to run a company, in 5 years I never ran a regression analysis. Okay, I never used the statistics that I had learned. And basically what happened in the crash of 2008 was that, okay? And so there's this irrational part of life that isn't explained by statistics. Okay, my chief teachers in the business school said, everything can be explained by statistics, and it can't be. It cannot be. And so there's a famous psychology professor from the University of Toronto right now who's very, very popular among young men because men want things to be rational. Okay, they want rules. Just tell me the rules and I'll do it. Okay, and the problem is that when you're in school, you learn all the rules in whatever topic you're studying, right? You learn all the rules of that particular topic, but that doesn't make you do anything. Okay, then you have to go out and live your life based on being educated, and that's not logos. That's not rational. Okay, that gets changed by the fact that you have a family and the fact that your parents die and all kinds of other things that happen, and people crashes in the stock market and wars and all sorts of things that you can't anticipate. And so those rules only help you to a certain extent. They give you a guidance, they give you some sort of rails that you can ride on for a period of time, but ultimately you have to rise above the rails, right? And so religion is like that too. Creeds are like that because they give you dogma, and dogma works for a lot of people. Okay, it's sufficient for a lot of people, and people can convince themselves that they believe and therefore they're okay, right? But if you haven't had an experience of God, if you're just taking the priest's word for it, then you've got a problem, okay? And you have a problem when you get to the end of your life, for one thing.
So what
Pardon?
was the capitalism question again?
Well, this professor from Columbia was talking about how rosy everything seemed to be.
Now?
And I think that's what you were saying, is that she was talking about how, civilization, or you're talking about civilization being great.
Seems like as soon as it's great, all of the hawkers come out.
Well,
The carpetbaggers converge.
But it doesn't really exist. We exist because we're in a kind of a bubble. We're in a capitalistic bubble. We exist in this way because we've got people who are indentured workers in this country. You know what I mean? People who don't have enough.
Well, we're trying to get rid of them, but yeah.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true.
It's not perfect.
And
evil, acting on evil, I guess.
And so therefore we find out that these rules fail us.
Yes.
Okay, so for example, in 2008, I lost my life savings. And, I had done everything right. I learned all the rules. I practiced law, and I went and started companies. I started a company that went public. And then the irrational part of life came in and whacked me.
I wonder whether a bad thing happened to a good person.
They
Or a
always
good
do.
thing happened to a good person.
Well, I mean, there's always luck, I guess, but there's always the unexpected also.
There's
And-
also the perspective, how
You
you're
know.
looking at it.
And
Right.
we really know till
Right.
I mean,
So I actively served in the Marine Corps for 23 years, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get my next promotion to colonel, right? And I was on track to do that because I was the reserve counterpart to the head of standards branch of the Marine Corps, which meant I was writing the performance standards for Marine jobs, all Marine jobs. And on January 4th, 1990, I was walking across a parking lot, fell down, God broke my leg. And so I can take that as myself saying, I don't want you to be a Marine general, I want you to go do this.
Tired of this Marine stuff.
Yeah, I'm tired of this Marine stuff. You already did that.
My
Go
heart
do
of
something
hearts.
else.
Right,
You ever gonna quit this? Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And-
so you got
and-
whacked.
And so Jungian analysts actually talk about that, be careful, you might have an accident, that an accident can happen to you. And,
It
Dr.
seems a
Jung
bit
talks,
far-fetched.
pardon?
It does seem a bit far-fetched to me.
But it's.
I mean, you made that of it.
There's this
Pardon?
great quote, what is that quote about?
Very strong spiritual.
If you said it sort of earlier when you said if you actualize yourself, it helps you, and if you don't, it'll destroy you. What is that quote? You know what I'm talking about?
Okay, so either you get it walking upright or not. Okay, I have the
Yes,
quote here.
you said that
All
earlier.
right, so let me give you the actual quote.
Because that sums it up pretty well. And then if you understand that dynamic, I think it all fits together.
What Edinger said was, what you don't understand of the unconscious will come at you like a truck on the wrong side of the highway.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
well, that's the idea.
Right, okay, so.
This
so
one is more subtle.
This paragraph.
I know it's hard to believe, but
Okay, so this is a little complicated, it's a long
What you
paragraph,
don't
but.
understand will come at you like a truck.
What you have not made conscious in your unconscious will come at you like a truck on the
Right.
wrong side of the highway.
yeah.
I think if it's
Yeah.
bad enough.
But that's, I
Okay,
think
so-
that's,
Like
I
add
think
on
that's in a way
200.
too extreme, because I don't think I think you can
Well,
find.
look at the Manson.
Well, I know,
Girls.
it can happen, but most people don't let it grow into a truck on the other side of the highway.
Okay, so Dr. Jung was about
Good.
paradoxes,
conscious.
okay?
Paradoxes, okay?
Paradoxes, okay, so he says,
Right.
hence all unconscious nature longs for the light of consciousness while frantically struggling against it at the same time. So here's the quote now. The conscious realization of what is hidden and kept secret certainly confronts us with an insoluble conflict. At least this is how it appears to the conscious mind. But the symbols that rise out of the unconscious and dreams show it rather as a confrontation of opposites, and the images of the goal represent their successful reconciliation. Something empirically demonstrable comes to our aid from the depths of our unconscious nature. It is the task of the conscious mind to understand these hints. If this does not happen, the process of individuation will nevertheless continue. The only difference is that we become its victims and are dragged along by fate toward that inescapable goal that which we might have reached walking upright if only we had taken the trouble and been patient enough to understand in time the meaning of the noumena that cross our path. The only thing that really matters now is whether man can climb up to a higher moral level, to a higher plane of consciousness in order to be equal to the superhuman task, or the superhuman powers which the fallen angels have played into his hands. So he's
That's not
talking.
it. That's not the quote.
But I love that quote because I think one of the sources of our malaise, one of the great sources of anxiety, depression, and anger in our society is not feeling we're in control.
Right.
It's feeling that we're being dragged on by fate and feeling that whatever happens, we're just being dragged to some awful end.
Right, and so okay, I can say that God broke my leg, or I can say that okay, something happened, I broke my leg, and now I'm going to do something else, and so therefore I can individuate in a different way. And as it happened after that event, I went on and founded a public company.
But I love John's thing too. That has happened to me, where
All of us.
my unconscious has hit me like a 12-ton truck coming the other way.
Yeah.
I buy that completely.
I think there's a quote too by Jung of what he understands as God. Remember that?
Yes,
You have that?
yes.
God is anything that
God is everything that crosses my path, my willful path, and changes the course of my life for better or for worse.
challenges all my
Challenges all my assumptions and changes my life for better or for worse. Something like that.
And all you have to do is see the eyes of a single person for that to happen.
Right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then boom, you're
like-
gone.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. Okay, so I don't know. Has this helped you at all, Brendan, or
Yes,
is
very
it
much.
worth pursuing?
Very much. I'm just sorry that you don't do this on a regular basis.
Well, we do it. I do it every Monday night online on YouTube, on the YouTube channel. And before you leave, I can give you the link to that.
Well, you sent me that already, and I just didn't think it would be very good. But maybe I'll try it online next
Okay,
Monday.
so every Monday, I mean, we were doing it every week, but it became kind of burdensome for everybody. I mean, John comes from Baltimore, and Bill was coming from Washington and lives in Lothian and so on. So
We do it monthly.
We do it
yeah, so
monthly.
we're doing it monthly
In
now.
person.
In person.
In person monthly, and in person in person with chat. So if you're online, I mean, I have 10 people here right now that are watching, and they're sending me chats. Unfortunately, when I'm physically here, I can't follow the chats.
Okay, I'll try doing that next week.
Okay, so so next week I'm going to start talking about psychology and alchemy, and pardon?
Good,
right.
good.
And so, I didn't bring the book. I guess I didn't bring the book, but
What's
But-
the book?
the book is Psychology and Alchemy, and we have a Dropbox. Okay, and so in our Dropbox, if you give me your regular email address, I can add you to the Dropbox. In the Dropbox are all the collected works of C.G. Jung, 20 volumes. Okay, if you had to buy it, it'd cost you a couple grand. and so. Psychology and Alchemy is volume 12, I think. And so you can follow along in the book. And, okay, good. Let's see. Okay, so Brendan Walls, is that the email address at the work? Okay, terrific. So I'll add you to the Dropbox, and then you can explore it, because like all the handouts that we've given out for the last 2.5 years are there, and lots of other stuff.
Great, thank you.
And this is the 109th group session that I've actually recorded, so
Wonderful.
all of them are there going back from the beginning.
You're saying 109, including the ones that are off Sammys,
Yeah.
non-Sammys?
Yes.
So
Yes.
109 total.
Yeah, there's 109 total. There have been about 80 maybe here at Sammy's or at the Gumhopa Center. The first 8 or so we did over at the Buddhist Center. Um, but I think that essay is profound. Okay, I think it's
You
profound.
have it.
Yeah,
And-
I got the book.
I got the other book.
If you read that, you will start to
That's a
understand
good
why
book.
it's important.
That's better. I like that one better than the second one, but I'm still reading the second one actually.
And
You read it, didn't
I think I was
you know,
skipping around
is
too
is
much
there
in the
something
second one.
specific
Library Notice?
that I can give you or teach you to help you with
Oh,
your
no, no,
plans?
no.
There's
No,
another one
I
called
don't
Jung's Regretfully.
have a
Oh,
clue.
And then it's
okay.
volume
I'm
2.
not-
Oh, okay.
Okay, I
I'm
thought
not a
that's
mental
what-
health
Yeah.
professional.
Oh, no, and that book, yeah.
But what I do
That's,
know is that many
I
people
don't know
seem
how
to
to
be
talk
helped
about that yet.
by
I
just
don't
talking
know
about
how to,
these
how
things.
to assimilate something
And-
that's.
Well, I can see what he's
So
doing,
for
but it's sort of
whatever
like
it's
I'm in
worth.
somebody's
And, you know,
private.
books like
you
this,
know,
like this
diary or
one or
something.
that one over there, which
And I'm
have
listening
young
on
quotes in
Audible,
them.
I'm listening
They're
to
young quotes
Oh,
on
that'd
every
be tough
topic.
for me.
Thus spoken characters. I'm listening to that on Audible.
And many of them are profound,
be
and
tough.
that
I have to be able
each
to
one
go
of
back
them
and
give
forth.
you sort
Yeah,
of
so I have to press rewind.
an inkling
And-
of what he was about. But then you have to get into it seriously, because you know what you need to understand is that there's a golly gee phase, okay, right?
That expression.
Well, the golly gee phase is that you read a book or two of Jung's and you say, wow, okay, that's awesome. And then you go on, but you've read it like a novel, and so you haven't
Right.
integrated it. Okay. And what has to happen is that you have to read it multiple times. And so I've actually read Answer to Job. I actually read it on the YouTube channel. So you don't have to read it, you can just listen to it.
Okay.
And I actually I read part of Ulanoff's book yesterday, so it's about the missing feminine in the God image, because I have to read this to you. You'll enjoy this. Des, it's what she said about Jung and the Virgin Mary, assumption of Virgin Mary being putting the feminine into the Godhead. And
Shove it up there.
yeah. And Olanoff said, you know, that's a very male way of doing it. It's a very stick it in kind of way. She says it makes it into an engineering project. It's really Mr. Fix It. And
You got a problem, I got the answer, right?
Where's my tools?
So she's good. I mean, she's good to read in that way, to see the feminine side. Okay.
Well, it's got a little wit to it as well.
Oh, yeah.
Think
Oh,
about
she's
funny.
real smart.
She's
She's
funny.
really smart.
Yeah.
the
Very-
phallic symbol of that.
Yeah.
Well, and the other one was saying that he had gotten caught by the devil's trick, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anne Belford Ulanoff. And this one, The Wisdom of the Psyche, is very good. And,
My professor friend from Maryland, emeritus, is getting her certification in New York
oh, is she?
for it, but she's really good as a source for books, and she loves you. She's told me several times about you, but I've never read any of her stuff.
And she's going to Union?
But she's going up to the Jung Institute.
Oh, to the
or
Jung
whatever it is
Institute in New
Institute.
York. Terrific.
to get her certification.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Kelly, are you going to do that?
Once,
Well, I have to be licensed first.
Yeah.
Next step.
so once you have the certification, what does that mean? What does
Uh,
that mean you're
well-
able to do?
Start
Well, you're able to be a psychoanalyst and to practice mental health psychotherapy.
Okay.
But Jungian analysis is much more difficult than just a regular psychotherapist. I mean, you can have a degree like Kelly has, which is a Master of Social Work or a Master of Family Planning or Family Training or something. Counseling, yeah, family counseling. And you can practice psychotherapy. Okay, but then after you've done that, okay, you're already practicing, right? In order to be a Jungian analyst, you have to be analyzed yourself for 100 hours
Wow.
minimum.
Okay.
And
Do it during flight training.
Oh, wow.
right, and then you have to be certified by the
About 2 birds with
CGU
one
Institute.
They're wanting us
One
to
of
go
the
by
CGU
That's amazing.
So next month,
That's the signal.
Have a good month.
Yeah, you
next
too.
month, for Monday in February, whatever it is.
Sounds good to me.
John, does that work for you?
I don't want to do it, so.
First Monday in February?
Yep.
Let me give you the date here. I should get.
It was nice seeing everybody.
Okay, so it'll be the 4th of February. 4 Feb. 4th of February. Nice to see you, Kelly.
Next time you're in. Glad you're up.
Nice to see you.
So you put down February what?
4th.
Thank you, that was very stimulating.
Oh.
Enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Quite welcome. And take a look at the YouTube channel.
I will, definitely.
Because there's just so much there. Then you'll be caught up with these guys, right? Because we've been at it for 2.5 years. But anyway,
February 4th.
yes, we're gonna have lunch someday.
Yes, we are.
Okay, terrific.
Get all those offices.
February 4th, right?
February 4th. We'll be in touch. You're still writing at home?
Not my writing, though. My writing has suffered greatly.
I know.
But that's, I have to, it's my choices. I can't say it's.
You're a freelancer?
No, I am, but I still keep my side business. But I'm mostly doing some resumes, and I have my real estate license. And it's interesting because you said about
Real estate license?
God broke your leg. By day.
Oh, okay.
Practical. Like, I got out of sales to go into writing, but with experience like Skip had, not with a broken leg, with my neck. From a car accident where I've got slants through the direction of the ground. I was trying to get back into I've had nothing but words with the writing. Day job, everything's been welcoming. It's funny, it's like almost like when you get a strange and going back. You know what I mean? When you fight against. So, I don't want my leg broken.
I know.
And that's what it feels like. As though that's been built with Exactly. Anytime you make a change, it's significant. I don't know.
Well,
Strange
I'm not sure how we did in the beginning. We stopped entirely.
Oh, it did?
Yeah, it stopped. About 40 minutes in, it stopped. And started it.
We'll find out tomorrow, I guess.
And tonight.
You got it.
Well,
Dad?
yeah.
Take care. Peace.
Take care. Nice to see you.